a number of individuals and then have some questions from the audience. I'm sorry, questions from the legislators. We're here today to consider or to hear from the administration and the County Comptroller's Office regarding where Nassau County found itself at the end of fiscal year 2017, and to get greater detail on the county executive's budget modifications for 2018 fiscal budget year. In past years, under both Republican and Democrat administrations, the fiscal year closing figures were always made available to the public after the close of the fiscal year, usually around the end of February. This year, those numbers have been delayed. We haven't received those numbers yet, nor has any detail been shared as to the budget modification submission to NIFA. So we're here basically to get a clearer picture on these issues from the presenters, and we would first, I guess, start with the administration, and we ask Deputy County Executive Page and Budget Director Persich to please are here to please just address us as you see fit.
I don't know. Do I know how to do it?
That's good.
Thank you. So I'm Mark Page, Deputy County Executive for Finance. We thought we would take you through our presentation, hopefully not spending a great deal of time on it, and then look forward to doing our best to answer your questions on what we're talking about. So first I'm going to ask Andy to talk about the 2017 year-end results.
2017, can you hear me? I'm not sure you can hear me. 2017, we're showing a deficit of $50 million. There was some goods and bads to 17 that I'll go over. One is sales tax revenue is still continuing to show good strength, and it will follow through in 18. We've had other expenses decline by about $7.3 million. Our principal and interest on debt service dropped by $4 million. We had salary savings of 6.7. Some other various revenue streams grew by 2.9, and state aid was up by about $1 million. We had additional savings in OTPS of about 3.0, which gave us total positive variances in 2017 of about $33.8 million. Some of the bad news. Departmental revenues dropped by 6.6%. Pilots dropped by 4.7. We also had some adjusting entries for the VLTs that will be picked up in 18, but will be a negative in 17 of 3.0. Interdepartmental charges dropped by 13.1, and the biggest number negative is the funding source, which was the non-borrowing for tax certs, which brought us down to $83.9 million, which gave us a deficit of 50.1. Now, the question will become, I'm sure, is how does the fund balance factor into that? Of that $50 million, we will be using some of the fund balance to fund that deficit. That said, because we didn't appropriate it in the budget, we would have had to do, we would have had to taken out the OO expense, back out the revenue from the other funding source, then reappropriate it, which would have been mass confusion at the end of the year. So what will happen is, and the controller will talk how the function will work in the accounting world, but they'll just write the check to cover the fund balance at the end of the year.
Basically, the fund balance, they'll write a check from fund balance to cover the deficit on a budget basis at the end of the year.
I see a lot of glazed looks, and I know we're getting into the accounting world, but
right, so maybe can we just jump in with questions?
Maybe, Rich, if we'll just jump in with questions, I guess.
Well, I think it would be easier just so we don't get lost on the topic, because what I think you're going to ask me the question is how is the fund balance fitting into the $50 million deficit is what I think. And I think it's we're covering part of it with that fund balance that we talked about with Restivo. So
You're already showing a negative balance, though.
What we're showing is if you compare the result of spending and revenue in 17 to the budget as in effect for 17, we've come out this $84 million, I'm sorry, the $50 million net worse than the budget. The biggest difference between the budget as in effect in 17 and this result is the budget, as it was put together at the beginning, included a source, other funding sources of bond proceeds. That was going to be the bonding for paying cert claims in 17. That never happened. So you're missing that revenue resource in 17, which gets you to a negative of about 50. Well, we obviously got through 17 and we paid for it somehow. And the fact is that we paid for it by spending fund balance to cover our expenses in 17. And that's not yet reflected here, so you have the negative. But as a practical matter, that 50 is covered by using fund balance. And when the dust settles with the official result to 17, it'll show that.
Okay, so then, at a minimum, we're talking, this is provisional, what you're describing for us.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have final numbers for 17 officially, and you'll hear more from the controller on that.
And the lion's share of this deficit is caused by the non-spending, non-borrowing for tax certs.
Yes,
Right.
as a practical matter.
And I believe the number we're getting from our finance person was at least 36 million was used from fund balance to make up for that loss of anticipated borrowing in 2017.
I think that the budget plan in 2017 included an expectation of using that 36 million of fund balance.
yes, that
I think mechanically it was never actually appropriated in the official budget in 17. So although it was talked about, it's not actually in the approved numbers structure of that budget. So you could think of it as inside this 50 million. As a piece of the 50 million.
But so what you're saying also that this $50 million, what's showing currently with the with this, I guess, provisional year-end results, this $50 million will be covered by fund balance.
Yes, but it's not 50 plus 30; it's 50.
It's 50 total. So 36 had already been anticipated to be spent for the tax certs.
36.4 that we were 36.4 is what we were projecting to use for tax certs. So
you'll be adding an additional 13.6.
Yeah, I mean
some accounting issues for certain treatment of certain things that didn't come in 17 that will pick up in 18 because of the timing, and I'll let the controller discuss the reasons as to why.
But yeah, the big piece is, we're out of 17. We didn't run out of money. How did we cover it? And at the end of the day, you cover it because you have the fund balance to cover it with.
So a couple months ago when we were voting on a bond, we were told that we had to pretty much bond a certain expense. You remember what that was, the Restivo thing. And we're told that we've already got a negative unassigned fund balance right now. That's right?
And you can listen to the controller on that, and that's probably true. And I guess
But
it's,
the administration told us that as well.
yes,
So if you've got a negative fund balance, unassigned fund balance,
yeah.
where's that money coming from? Now, how are you going to make it much more negative, unassigned balance? And we're going to have to fill that hole at some point. Where's it all coming from?
Well, I guess there's probably something to be said, and I'm not going to be able to explain this clearly, between unassigned and assigned bits of fund balance, because there are actually reserves that have limits on how you use them in addition to the unassigned balance. And if you go back and look at the fund balance number over the last, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years in the county, in a number of years it was actually considerably negative. And you might reasonably ask, how could that possibly be? But the county was functioning. The scoring.
Because you have cash and you use the cash.
Yeah.
So that's a difference between cash, obviously, and on the one hand, and you're accounting for it. But
and one of the things that was probably significant in past years, and still makes some difference, is the extent you've issued cash flow notes, and they're outstanding across from one year to the next. That helps how much cash you actually have in the drawer, although it probably doesn't help the official score on fund balance.
So you can have lots of cash and still be bankrupt, right? Under
maybe. And the question ultimately is whether you're insolvent, which means that literally you don't have enough cash in the drawer to meet the check you're writing today.
Or if your liabilities exceed your assets considerably.
Yeah. Although, again, when you're doing accrual accounting, you can be carrying a liability, but it doesn't have the day you're going to have to pay it in it. So you get, as long as you don't actually have to pay the liability immediately.
Yeah, the cash is there and you float.
Yes.
I understand. But in other words, what we would be doing, in essence, is invading further the cash available to meet the accrued obligations for which are assigned, A and B, for which we can't use fund balance.
Yes.
So
it means you've got less.
And we were told, I thought, and forgive me if I misapprehended what we were told previously, but I thought you can't do that.
You know, numbers are a way of presenting where you are at any given moment, and there are standards about how you present them, whether you're doing this on a budget basis or a GAAP basis, and each one is a picture of where you are, and each one is accurate in some way and probably not totally accurate. As they move up and down, it certainly gives you a general idea of how much latitude you have to deal with unexpected events. And as you use this fund balance, you have less latitude. As it grows, you have more. It's a number that credit rating agencies, for instance, look at and complain about when it's going in the wrong way. We've spent quite a lot of time in the last week or so with the rating agencies, which ultimately confirmed the ratings they already had on our bonds, which is nice. That's happened in the last day, actually. But you think they're numbers. They should be objectively accurate, and they should represent exactly what's going on. And They're a picture. They're another artwork. They're not 100% accurate as to what's happening at any given moment.
So what you're telling me basically is accounting gives you ways to make things look however you want almost, but okay. Accounting is a wonderful thing.
Yes.
But so what I'm getting out of this, and again, please correct me if I'm misstating it, I don't want to do that, is that we're looking at it in a different way than we looked at it a couple months ago.
Well, I don't know. On Restivo,
Yes.
we're looking at it differently because, as I'll get into, of the changes we made and recognized as having happened in the update to the budget that we put out on March 15th. Because we actually, in that update, identified the resources to enable us on a budget basis to pay for Restivo. So we actually swept together, altogether, about $54 million worth of
Cash.
better, whether expectation of revenues or expectation of spending less in this year. And that gave us the room to, as a budget matter, include paying for Restivo out of our current resources in 18.
Okay. So I've deflected you long enough. I'll let you go on. Would you be just so kind, perhaps, as to send the committee a bit of a written explanation of the differences between the two ways of looking at it? Would that be okay?
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah,
You know, I think
I'll
we
give
have
it
to look-
I'll give it a shot. And if it doesn't, if you're as mystified after you read it as
I won't be
before,
surprised because I don't have accounting training.
well, yeah, neither do
But I'll
I. But
try.
I've dealt with it for a long time.
Yeah.
But here we are.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Nicolello.
You mentioned Restivo. Earlier this year, as obviously you're aware, the administration came to us with a plan to pay Restivo using $45 million in bonds. Ultimately, even though there was money set aside in a segregated account for the purpose of paying Restivo, ultimately, we, after many hearings and many hours of deliberations, gave the administration $23 million in bonding at the request of the administration, with the balance to come from this segregated account. Was that plan ever submitted to NYFA?
NYFA was certainly aware of that plan. Your authorization of that $23 million exists. It needed to happen before we actually made the payment out from that account, or it would not and could not exist. In the amendment to the budget on March 15th, we complied with the NYFA mandate to have a plan that was gap balanced in 18. As we'll talk about in a minute, I don't know if we're going to hold on to that through 18. I think it's highly uncertain. But to rely on the bonding for $23 million of Restivo would, on NYFA's gap balance definition, put us $23 million negative. It's useful because it's cash, and by the time we get to the end of this year, we may well need it. But as of the update in March and events since, we're actually doing fine on that gap standard, ignoring a couple of major issues that I'll talk about.
That was a very long answer to a very short question, which asked basically, was the plan that was developed by the administration and was put before us after many hours of deliberation, which was approved in terms of $23 million in bonding, and which, by the way, was told to us by administration officials that NYFA was okay with that plan. Was that submitted to NYFA as the way to pay Restivo?
No. It has not been submitted to NYFA. It was not submitted to NYFA in the update on March 15th. It may well be submitted to NYFA by the time we get to the end of 18 to have a viable plan through this year.
But why wasn't it, that was the plan that the administration put forward that we did our part to authorize in terms of the bonding. What changed? Why wasn't that submitted to NYFA for approval?
Because we were able to find resources in 18 to pay Restivo out of current resources in 18, which meant that we could actually, in our budget as updated in March, meet the NYFA mandate that our budget be gap balanced.
But so the administration unilaterally decided that it would not proceed with what it had proposed and what we had approved, and decided it would go in a different direction. Is that my understanding? NYFA did not say to the administration, you cannot do this. The administration between February 5th or February 5th or 6th when we approved this, and middle of March when you submitted the budget modification, unilaterally decided to go in a different direction.
By the legislature authorizing that bonding before the payment was made on Restivo, the county has the option to bond that $23 million. If the legislature had not acted before the payment, we would not have that option at all. We have a budget as of mid-March that doesn't rely on that bonding. By the time we get through 18, I think there's a high chance we will be relying on that bonding to cover our needs.
Yeah, we approved the bonding to pay for Restivo, to pay for the Restivo judgment. We did not approve it to be a fallback position for the county to pay for any other expenses that came forward. So from our perspective, if you're not using it now, we may consider withdrawing that authorization. But you're saying that you were able to fill on a budgetary basis the gap. But to do that, there are a variety of revenue sources. And I want to focus in on one. Fees. You're proposing to fill part of Restivo, the Restivo expense, through increasing fees.
Yes.
Those fees have not been approved by this legislature, and the indications that have been given by a number of us is that there's no appetite to go back to these types of fees. So you haven't. I mean, you've submitted a document to NYFA, but you haven't, on any sort of basis, filled the gap that's created by Restivo.
I don't think that's exactly true, in that the portion of the balanced plan in March that relies on fees subject to approval by the legislature, I believe is about $9.7 million.
That we require your approval on.
So,
Which
well,
we're, no.
Here's the objection we're going to have. There was, as represented by the administration, a plan to pay for Restivo using bond proceeds that we authorized, and the amount in the segregated account. The administration unilaterally, without even consulting us, despite the fact that we had gone through many hours of deliberations to authorize that bonding, unilaterally decided that they were not going in that direction and going into another direction. And part of which relies upon these fees, which bulk of which certainly are not going to go through the legislature. Here's what concerns me. Restivo is an unusual case, an extreme case of a $45 million bonding. I understand that a $45 million judgment. I understand you don't want to bond for such payments in general. But this is unusual. It's emergency. I think anyone would understand that in certain circumstances, if bonding is available and you can use it, you use it. But you've determined, the administration determined not to go down that path because you think you can achieve it in other ways in the budget. Speaking for myself, do not believe that is an appropriate path to go, especially when this money has been either in an account and in bonding authorization to come back and now ask us to have the residents of Nassau County pay more in fees when the money is already there to pay this judgment.
As will be, I think, evident in this presentation, we also have something in the neighborhood of $350 million of claims for tax overpayments that the county owes. In order for us to issue bonds for any purpose, as you're very much aware, we need NYFA's approval. That would include bonds for the $23 million in Restivo. If at the end of the day, the only means we think we have to meet the cost of accumulated claims for overpayments is to bond, that too would require NYFA approval. I think that a part of our concern is that we come up with a plan that actually we think meets our needs for this year and going forward to take to NYFA in the hope that we could get their approval of that plan, as opposed to starting out in small pieces. And I don't know, we may well end up in small pieces, but at least we would hope to have a plan that, you know, the pieces stacked up to make work.
Here's the thing. When we passed that bonding, there was money in a segregated account for that purpose. And we had many representations from the administration that there would be difficulties with cash flow, there would be potential bond rating decreases if we didn't pass this bonding. Now, we had spent an entire year with people criticizing borrowing for various purposes. The Magano administration had sought to borrow for the purpose of that Restivo judgment. So it was with great difficulty that we agreed to even $23 million for that purpose. Now we learned that unilaterally the administration decided not to submit that to NYFA and decided to go in a different direction. Now, we approved those bonds in good faith, but those actions of the administration to turn around and change the plan without telling us to make us go through that entire exercise of multiple hearings and to go through the stress of having to vote for that bond, to give this administration the chances it started off. Now for the administration to on its own, without telling anybody, to change the entire plan, you have unilaterally not only made that budget modification, but you have eroded whatever good faith exists. So not only would we consider withdrawal of the authorization for that bonding, but we will be very skeptical as we go forward for the rest of this year. I mean, our position was come to us as we go through the year. If you need additional borrowing, we will consider it. But at this point, I don't know why we would do that, because we may give you authorization to use bonds for various purposes, but we have no ability to know if you're actually going to use those, that if you may come up with another plan another down the road. So, again, by this action, you have eroded the good faith that existed on January 1st when we started. And you have also eroded the good faith especially of the 5 members of this side of the aisle that after much thought and much consternation, went and gave the authorization to that administration to give the administration a good start in this year. So I can't state in as strong words as I possibly can that this was, again, you have eroded the good faith that existed unilaterally, without notice to anyone. If you had told me it went to NIFA and NIFA said no, it would have been a different set of questions that arose. But NIFA didn't even have a chance to opine on this. And again, we were told when this was going on that in fact NIFA would approve of it. So that's number one. Number two, these fees that you're relying on in part, they're not going to happen. I mean, there may be some of these that we'll consider there are new fees for services that are not being charged, but we're not going back. We're not going back and asking people to pay another $5 on red light cameras. They're already paying $150 a piece. We're not going back and raising parks fees that were recently raised. So I don't know where your budget modification plan is, but I certainly, I'm certainly concerned about the way this administration is going about its business, just from a standpoint of transparency.
It's unfortunate that you see it that way. I think that the action that the administration asked for was extremely time sensitive. We'd been here, I guess, for a month when that discussion took place. The payment was required to be made, I believe, February 8th. And in order to have the possibility of bonding that expense, legislative action had to happen before the payment on February 8th. Since then, we spent a considerable amount of time and energy trying to find whether we could come up with a viable plan to actually pay our expenses out of current funds in 18. We had a number of actions reflected in the March 15th proposal that enabled us to identify resources that we had not identified as of the end of January that we think are available to us in 18. And we covered Restivo. We also covered a number of add-backs that we would propose against the cuts that were imposed at the beginning of 18 on the 18 budget. Some of it was fortuitous. The economy is doing well. The sales tax collections are doing well. We've moved up that assumption. We actually think that that's a reasonably conservative action. Collections so far this year are well above the 3% increase annually that we put in. We have had lower social service expenses because the caseloads are actually somewhat lower, which probably relates to job numbers that are doing very well in the county. And a number of other actions that were identified that we thought were doable and made sense to improve what resources are realistically available to us in this year. We'd not done that as of the end of January. We did do that between then and the end of March. Much of this is in fact a proposal, adding back spending for various purposes is subject to appropriation and approval by this body. That, remains in the future in terms of whether and how it's to be done. I keep going back to the timing need for that bonding authorization, and I think it's unfortunate that we didn't understand each other better in terms of whether, well, I suppose in 2020 hindsight, that we were going to find other resources available above and beyond increases in fees that would do us good this year.
All right, I've already probably beaten this to death, but just a couple of points. We went through those hearings, and there was not one word or a hint that you were looking to do this in any other way. It was impressed upon us that this was the only way to do it, that cash flow would be, the cash flow issues would be tremendous, and a potential bond rating decrease. And somehow between March 6th and the middle of, February 6th and March 14th, you were able to cobble together this plan. But again, in terms of disclosure, transparency, not a word was given to us that we're moving away from the original plan and we're submitting something different tonight. And thirdly, in terms of the monies that you've been able to identify throughout over the last month, you haven't even touched the additional spending needs that there are in this county. You have to hire more fire marshals. You have to hire more corrections officers. You haven't even touched those here. So while you've identified additional monies to fill the gap, because now we're paying Steve through budget, through operating, you still have many other needs that are going to be untouched.
We have provided for hiring new correction officers, and I guess we can get into the details on the rest of it. I would just point out that the difficulty with paying for Restivo or other current expenses with bonds is that although it works at the time, it leaves you with the obligation to pay back the bond in the future, so that using that mechanism, although it's obviously necessary from time to time, isn't free.
We made those exact same arguments because we did not want to bond at all. We did not want to spend $1 in bonding because there was money in a segregated account. So we made those exact same arguments over and over again, and members of the administration argued over and over again, we need this money, cash flow, bond rating decrease. So now you're making the same arguments that we made and throwing it back in our face. Again, going forward, we will be skeptical when we get requests from this administration, particularly in the area of borrowing, because we don't know if after we make the approvals, if you may decide to go in a different direction.
I hear your statement. I'm not sure that skepticism is the worst thing in the world, but I hope that it can be answered in a way that will convince you of the substance of what we are saying from time to time.
Yeah, if I might just jump in, and we've talked about this maybe enough, but had the administration maybe come to us and said, look, if we're going to do the bonding, we need this bonding right away, and if we do the bonding, it gives us a great deal more latitude and options in the future to deal with the budgetary problems of the county. We may have done it anyway, but it really was presented to us as it's necessary, it has to be done this way, there's no other way. If we don't do it, it would be detrimental to the county. Let me ask you a loaded question. Was this the plan all along, to get us to bond and then to use that money later on in the future? Or did the administration happen to come upon this change of plan afterwards through research or reconfiguring.
I keep going back to this legal problem, which is that you have to have the bond authorization in order to be able to do it before you expend the money.
We all understood that. Okay. We understood that there was a deadline to do the bonding.
In answer to your further question, I think that at the time the administration was asking for that bonding authority, it really had no idea what could otherwise be done in 18 to address this need. And we did a considerable amount of work between the end of January and mid-March to try to lay out where we were and what resources we might be able to identify this year. And I think we were fortunate, quite honestly, in several, just changes in our circumstances with time. I mean, the sales tax being one of them. In that period that, quite honestly, I don't think we would have necessarily been able to predict at the end of January.
Okay. I mean, I'd like to be able to accept that answer. Does the minority, or we have any other questions with respect to these issues? Minority have any questions with respect to these particular, before we allow them to go on with the presentation? Any other questions with respect to Restivo? And
my questions are more tied into tax certiorari.
Okay.
And a little, I guess at some point I want to
just put your.
Oh, I'm sorry about that, Vinny. I was saying my questions are more tied into the tax cert liability, and then eventually I want to jump into the revenue, but I don't have any.
Okay. Restivo. Can we ask you to proceed with your presentation?
Okay. So, I guess I'm on, you on this? Yeah, you are on the same chart I am, sorry. Okay, so I would say that the major problems that we're facing as a budget matter for 18 and going forward are the tax claims liability backlog. As of the end of 16 and the audited financials for 16, the estimated value of that was, I think, about $340 million owing. As of the end of 17, on the tentative numbers that we have right now, it's something over $500 million. The increase has to do with LIPA and the estimate of what their claim for tax overpayments is worth. Since the end of the year, when that estimate, which is the time of that estimate, we've had a number of conversations with LIPA. I think that there's an excellent chance that we'll end up with a settlement with them that will require a step down in their taxable assessed value going forward, but will not actually require us to pay the $200 some odd million of back claim that if we had ended up in litigation, we thought we were very likely to lose on. So that gets us back into sort of $350 million of cert claims. Not all of those are due at this moment, but there's a substantial amount of that, and the county attorney's office is here and I think available for questions, perhaps after me if I can get through this. But it's unfortunate that we're in a position where basically the cert bar has pretty much control over when the bill comes due as a judgment that the county owes to the scale of, I mean, currently probably well over $100 million, and over time, something that goes up toward that 300 number, and it's hard to know exactly how much and when that will land. It is an accountant's estimate of ultimately what we'll owe on those claims. And we talked a little bit about the perfect accuracy of numbers that come out of that, but it's a general picture of the problem. We talked about the use of the fund balance in 2017. It just reduces our maneuverability going forward. I think it's notable that in 17, the county paid just under $90 million in terms of tax claims. In 18, we appropriated $30 million for those claims, and 18 is the second year of DAF, and in 17, at the end of 17, that account had $96 million in it. At the end of 18, we expect it will have had deposits that put it over a little over 200 million. And how much can we actually pay out from that fund in addition to the 30 million we've appropriated? Well, it's the way DAF works as enacted by New York State is difficult to access. The fact that it's in separate accounts for each property, and I've probably been through this and will try not to, bore you forever on it, but there's a separate account for each property with an amount of money in it. When that property comes through with a settled claim amount for the year that that account number corresponds to, you should be able to match them up. If there's the right number coincidentally in their account, that's nice. If the number's too small in the account, the county has to add to get up to that year's claim to make it work. If there's too much money in the account for that year, the money is actually distributed among the tax jurisdictions in the county. It's not kept available for more claims. It actually goes away, a small portion of it to the county and the rest of the school districts and everybody else. We would hope to get state legislation which quite honestly made it easier to access those funds. At the moment, our estimate is probably about $40 million of claims that we're likely to receive by the end of 18 that we will be able to pay out of the balance in the fund. That would bring our 30 to 70 as compared to last year's 90. It doesn't really, it's not on a scale to address this 350 of back claims that we're talking about. We are looking at, if we were really going to lock in how we're going to pay that back claim, maybe it's debt restructuring, maybe there's a transaction relating to the sewer system, maybe at the end of the day it's more cert bonds. Particularly the last one, well, the debt restructuring and certainly the cert bonds and I guess the sewer system as well requires NIFA and requires this body, obviously, as how best to solve it. I mean, in a perfect world, somehow I suppose we would find available current resources that we could afford to pay these claims out of as we went along, because then we wouldn't be faced with, in the future, paying the cost of whatever we'd done to defer that payment. How this works, I think, remains a just ongoing question for us. The next one, I think we've basically talked about. It's our
If I might
March.
interrupt you,
Yeah?
I think Mr. Coppell has a specific
Yeah.
question with respect to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one thing that you mentioned particularly caught my ear. If indeed what you're saying with LIPA is the case, that's good on a long-term basis, of course, because we don't have to borrow to pay that back or
Yes.
make any other adjustments. But it will, in essence, result in a lot of taxes going up for everyone else, because the tax rate will bump necessarily, won't it? Where's the
Yeah.
revenue going to come from to make that up? In other words, will it stay in the same class?
It dep- I
And
mean,
then the
there are
rate
two,
just bumps up, and then it's just a wash?
there, to the extent the property, basically there are two generating plants that LIPA has in Nassau County. And to the extent when you revise the assessment, they stay in class 3. What happens is the rest of class, and they go down, what happens is the rest of class 3 goes up, and that's the utility class. So what you're talking about is water, Verizon, things of that kind.
This is a significant bump in the rate for that class. Okay.
Yes. One sort of ambiguity in this whole enterprise, and again, the county attorney's office is probably better able to describe it than I am, but because of changes in their facilities, some of that property is likely to move from class 3 to class 4. And how that plays through is, I guess, complicated is the best I'm able to say about it.
But basically, it's not going to result in any impact on other businesses or homeowners. It shouldn't. the
Well,
way you're
not so
describing it.
much, except that,
A good impact, actually, it should have, because we won't have to borrow.
yes, the settlement definitely is good because you don't have to borrow for $200-some-odd million and then pay it back. So that's good. The thing that's not so good in prospect is that, particularly for the school district, county-wide, I mean, I'm not sure it makes a lot of difference in terms of the revenue you end up with, but for the specific school district where this commercial property existed, what happens is that if you lose a chunk of
They've got a disaster.
tax revenue,
If it's a small district, they've got a disaster.
it shifts the burden to the residents in that
Yeah.
district. Yes, and that's what the phase down does in that district.
Gives them a time to adjust.
Yes, but they're probably not happy with the adjustment.
Clearly, why
Yeah.
would they be? And when are you, the DAF restructuring that you propose, you're going to need a home rule on that?
I don't even know the answer because the restructuring.
Because in other words, what we'd all love to see it before it's submitted to the state, so we can better understand it.
I hear you.
That would be appreciated.
I hear you.
It's a good, as the
The
presiding officer said, it would be a good
I
thing
hear you.
towards
The-
transparency.
The question of the home rule message is, as you're probably aware, I mean, what dictates whether you need a home rule message is basically whether the state legislature decides you need a home rule message. And
So either way, you can undoubtedly let us know and give us a chance to look at that and comment on it before it goes, whether it requires that or not, the home rule message. And we think you should, at least I do. The restructuring that you're talking about,
yeah.
what are you talking about, a stretch out?
Well,
Essentially, because
yes,
the rates have
yes,
gone up.
in essence. I mean, it's a restructuring. It's not a refunding for savings, for present value savings. It would be, one possibility would be to take the debt payment structure on bonds already outstanding to pay for tax overpayments, which have a sort of height now and dwindle down to 2043, and to refinance that debt so that it was a flat number every year from now out to 2043. And what that does is to give you savings up front and expenses in the back.
It'll give you, I get that.
I mean, that would be one.
It's front-loaded, and now you want to smooth it. And
That would be one sort of mechanical way to do it. Another mechanical way to do it would be to simply issue bonds in the amount that you needed. Either of these are debt transactions that are going to require NIFA.
and they'll entail a rate increase, almost certainly at this point. In many
A
cases.
rate increase in terms of the
In terms of
interest
the-
rate required?
Yeah. I would imagine.
Yeah, maybe. I don't think at this moment a tremendously large one, but yes, I mean, there's no savings in it per se.
No, I get that.
The water question is, you know, as you're very aware, the operation of the sewer system is now being carried out by Suez in a relationship that's been negotiated with, you know, a lot of substance over a period of time. This would be a possible transfer of title to the sewer system for
You see, so I want to get into that as well, because this was brought up by the previous administration, as you undoubtedly know.
yes.
And at that time, there were a number of objections. It's very hard to understand how this could be anything but borrowing again, because essentially the most efficient way for municipal finance is regarded as a municipal borrowing. Now, we would be, in essence, substituting private borrowing, which is going to be more expensive, A, and B, we're going to add a profit component to that, which any private lender private purchaser will require over and above its borrowing costs, and C, coming from A and B, seems inescapable. You're going to have a significant rate increase on the sewers because of that. Now, that might all make sense if you take that money and used it to save money elsewhere. It's pretty complex. In other words, if you're going to take that money and overall refinance something else and knock out interest costs, and somehow this ends up, or use it to settle cert debt, or whatever it is, where that may carry a higher rate, that might make sense. But if you do go down this road, I think we're going to need, if you're going and hope to have any success, we're going to need a lot of advance notice and explanation.
I certainly hear that, and I share your concern about the cost of money that would be in a transaction of that kind. I mean, it is technically the sale of an asset. The proceeds of an asset sale are technically a current revenue. The proceeds of bonds, at least according to NIFA, are not a current revenue. How that all plays through, I don't know.
I get
think
that.
I believe
but
that
it would necessitate. But once the new owner has it, they need to pay their costs and make a profit. And what is the current profit for a P3 buyer? What are they looking at? You're probably looking closer to 10 or 12%, or maybe more. So it's hard to understand how that works.
Or maybe it's too easy.
Well, it's a facile type of thing, but you know, it's got to make sense at the end of the day.
I agree.
Okay, thanks.
I think that, you know, that the screen that's in front of you is basically talking about the various sources that we were able to identify, which we think are real, which gave us more resources between a sort of having inherited a budget situation in January and having spent a pretty intense number of weeks talking to agencies and looking at our assumptions between then and mid-March. That included a number of revenues, some of them, as we've discussed, requiring your approval, some of them not. And I don't know if it's worth my taking your time to go through each one. I'd be happy to respond to questions now or in whatever form you're interested in.
You know what, and I apologize. What I prefer to do from this point forward, even though I hadn't lived up to this, was let you continue and finish your presentation, and then we'll have questions afterwards. Yeah. So I
finish my presentation and be quiet for a few minutes. Yes, okay. I get it. This one is basically looking at what's actually happened in terms of, I mean, one of the problems when you're doing budget work is that you don't have information that's up to date when you're doing it even. Obviously, for March, you have better information than you do on the 1st of January, but information gradually catches up with you as you go along, and we now have information through February, which has informed projections as of the end of March for us as a practical matter.
That's correct.
And what this, in rather small print, is tracing is that our actual experience since the information and assumptions underlying March 15th has actually been a little bit better in terms of the prospect for balance for this year for the county than we were relying on when we did the March update. And this talks about the fact that basically the economy in the county is doing pretty well. I think that the proportion of revenues and expenses is kind of interesting to look at, but there's no startling news in it. There's, I think, no really major changes in that. And it's worth noting that as we go along, one of the basic good things going on in the county is that actually the number of jobs has been going up. That, as I think I mentioned earlier, has actually brought down the number of people applying for and getting benefits and needing benefits from the county. Home values going up. The fact that the stock market has done all right, notwithstanding some wobbling, is helpful to us because it's helpful to the, you know, I guess, wealth in the county as a practical matter. The ongoing number of building permits for reflecting development in the county has been doing well and continues to be doing so. And I guess that's about it on my presentation. And I'm happy to answer questions now or later, however you want to do this.
Okay, we have any questions? Okay, Mr. Nicolello. And then we'll go.
The county's financial system shows there's a deficit of $1.4 million in pilot revenue for 2017. Do you know why that is?
Yeah, we had a little bit of an issue when we were doing the pilots, I think, in 17, and when we were accounting for them in the 17 numbers, we realized that we had a shortfall in pilot revenue. which is just an offset to what the revenue stream would have been. The calculation when it was initially done, you know, it's a very complex calculation that we've now automated, which we are working with IT to make this not a spreadsheet type of thing, which we've experienced in the past here. So we've kind of automated the system, and I think going forward we'll have more better, solid, accurate numbers. So
Aren't pilots the fixed number, though?
they could vary based on assessments, though, too.
Yeah,
There were some assessment-based pilots. We're trying to get away from those structures, and we've kind of told the IDA to do a fixed contractual amount so that we don't have these issues going forward.
It would be a huge improvement to just have a contract with numbers in it as opposed to variables going back to the taxable value, which brings in all the problems we experience in doing that.
Okay. The comptroller indicates that the federal transportation aid was not received in 2017. Is that accurate?
That's to do with the TransDev budget. We are anticipating getting the grant money in. It's a question of the timing of it and when we're going to receive it. It'll still be 17 money, but it will be accounted for in 18. We'll pick up the revenue in 18, but for accounting purposes, we have to not recognize it in 17.
So it gets recognized in 17 eventually.
Eventually, but it'll be an 18 item. So.
And in terms of the OTB revenues, they've indicated that they're going to be paying the county in the order of $3 million in May of 2017. Does that get, assuming that comes in, and I think that's a good assumption, does that get applied to 17 or 18?
It'll apply to 18. We'll take the write-down in 17, but we'll pick it up in 18 is what will happen. So. I'll let the Controller's Office talk to that. It's about collectability and availability. It's one of those accounting treatments for these things of when it becomes collectible and available. So we've had extensive discussions on it. So,
with respect to the property tax collections, I understand there's a little bit of a variance this year. My understanding in the past, it's met or exceeded expectations, but now there's a negative number that's being applied to.
17 or 18?
17.
It's probably to do with some of the pilot issues and how we
going back to the
pilots?
pilots?
And the abatements too. Yes.
Okay. That's all I have for now.
Mr. Coppell.
Thank you. So before I ask anything, I just want to know, are you still having fun in the job?
Are you talking to me?
Yep, both of you.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. Today, maybe not so much, huh? All right. The DSS case, I only have a few more. You'll be happy to hear, I'm sure. The DSS caseload, those things, have you taken into account the fact that the reimbursement will fall off as well? Is that included?
We've accounted for that in the projections.
You've accounted for that.
With an offset in state aid, yes.
Right, and as well, the same kind of question, when you mentioned the new revenues, are those full-year numbers or just balance of 18 numbers?
Would be the balance of 18 numbers. If we could get it in quicker, the better. You know, we'd account for that sooner.
So 19 presumably will be, if those things go through, they're considerably more.
Yes.
The one-shots that you've got there, sales of property, so forth.
Yes.
Wasn't the indication that NIFA won't go for that in terms of our budget?
They haven't said that to us. I mean, their reaction to this proposal in mid-March was basically, they didn't take explicit action to approve it or any sort of thing of that kind, but they also didn't say they thought it was bad. And they have not complained to us about the use of property sales. A big piece of that is actually selling title to ground leases on a couple of buildings that...
You want to sell the ground lease rather than the actual property?
The property is already owned by a developer and built and occupied.
So we've got long-term ground leases that we would sell?
Yes.
I guess if it's not long-term, you're not going to end up selling. You can't sell it.
Yeah, and it's got to be long-term because he wouldn't have built the building on it otherwise.
Well,
on
it
the
may
other
have been
hand,
long-term when they built the building. It doesn't mean it's long-term now.
it's still pretty long-term, but I think what happens is that if you build a building and it works out and it's occupied and you're making money, that you're interested in locking in the ground, because eventually what happens is that it can be far out, but when you're trying to refinance something, you begin to knock into the refinancing assurance that you have if you're getting toward the end of the ground
In other words,
lease.
these are surplus properties as far as we're concerned?
The properties aren't ours. I mean, the
No,
buildings
the
on the
ground lease. These are the
Yes,
ground leases
yes,
are ours.
yes.
We're paying rent on it.
We're
paying rent on the ground lease.
We're receiving rent
Well,
on the
you're
ground
also-
lease.
You're also paying rent to the owner of the property itself.
No, we're not using those properties.
We're not using it.
They're actually private development using.
We don't own the ground.
We do own
We
the
do own,
ground.
that's what I
We
was
own the
trying to understand.
ground,
Okay, fine.
but it's a matter of
Got it.
private development on
Now I get it.
ground
Now I
we
got
own.
it. Now I got it.
Okay.
So the value of the ground lease is not going to depreciate. It will appreciate as time goes on, because then you're getting closer to selling the fee ownership, actually, in essence. Okay.
Yeah.
So how many properties are there like that?
I think a couple.
A couple? Okay, fine. Why is well, it doesn't matter why. There was surplus at the time. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Abrams?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to piggyback real quick onto Legislator Capel's questions as it pertains to the ground leases in certain buildings. This number was calculated, this $5.3 million was calculated based off of, I guess, properties that you have identified that you would look to sell, ground leases you would look to sell. Do you have a list of these properties?
We have a list, but we're trying to keep them confidential because this is a negotiated sale. Right now, we can give them to you.
They don't add, the list doesn't add up to this number. If a substantial amount of it works, you get there. The difficulty with an exact number is that you end up laying out your side of what's an ongoing negotiation, which you don't actually want to do if you can help it.
I get that. No,
Yeah.
I'm not. I guess I'm not asking for what the county is looking for. I guess I'm asking for. I guess if it could be done in a confidential memo, because obviously the legislature has to approve the
Yes,
sale of these
you
properties.
get the final approval.
So before we get to the point where we are considering properties or ground leases for sale, and potentially the legislature accepting or rejecting them, I would think that maybe a conversation will take place in terms of furnishing us a list. I'm just,
Yeah.
especially when it pertains to $5.3 million in revenue. I want to focus a little bit more on just establishing a framework for the tax cert liability. I heard earlier that the approximate number, including LIPA, was over $500 million. Per the controller's fact sheet, it identifies it as $560 million. You talked a little bit earlier about there being money set aside. I just want to make sure I understand the DAF money that's set aside to pay towards the $560 in liability, or is there DAF money set aside to pay for the tax cert?
The 500 sum is as of the end of 17. The fact is, there's a flow of claims coming in all the time, which is kind of somewhere between, it's generally somewhere between 75 and 100.
Okay.
So you need to deal with the backlog. You also need to deal with the current flow. Generally, when we have resources, we try to pay the oldest first, but if you were really going to try to clean up, well, I guess if you got to clean up for the backlog, that would be cleaning up the old stuff, and then you need to be covering the new as well. And DAF is intended to, cover the kind of current flow.
Correct.
It didn't start until 17, so it's got 1 year done. 18 is its second year. the county didn't manage to pay anything out of the balance in 17. On the other hand, claims don't sort of ripen very fast. I mean, it's the biggest source of claims, 84. And if they're relating to the 17 year, which would be the first year of this, how soon do they get final so that you actually have a fixed number to pay? Well, some of them now, I imagine, and going forward. And as I say, the estimate I've managed to get out of this enterprise so far as to what of 17 and 18 we could pay out of the DAF by the end of 18 is about $40 million. I would very much hope that we could do better than that, but I haven't got the track to it at the moment.
Okay. So that kind of leads me into my second question of the total outstanding tax cert liability that has been reduced to judgment and settlements to date, because obviously we're talking the old versus the new.
We should get the county attorney's office to answer that question. It's my understanding is that something over 100 right now. That's pretty much at the discretion of the cert bar to hand to us as a judgment owing.
Counsel just advised me that I guess the county attorney, if that's okay, Chairman, if I can have the county attorney come up after we finish with Mr. Page, sure, that we can bring the county attorney up to talk about that. Thank you. I don't know if it's best that I ask the remaining amount of my questions in regards to the acceleration of payment of the outstanding cert judgment. Should I be asking them to the county attorney's office, or should I be asking them to
you know, if we could, why don't we ask the county attorney to come up now and sit with them?
Well, I know Legislator Birnbaum also has questions directly for Mr. Page. Can she jump in and then I'll pick up?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. My questions are about the new revenue sources, and a lot of them have to do with fines and increased fees, et cetera. Given that it's almost the end of April, when would the legislature start seeing such proposals, and how soon would they foreseeingly be enforced to even get these numbers by the end of 2018?
I think that the piece of it that requires legislative approval,
I think we were planning on getting something to you for May, the May meeting.
and otherwise, a lot of it has to do with authorized parks fees, and some of that is actually just implementing fees that the legislature has already authorized in a kind of multi-year program. Last year? 2016.
Because over $21 million is from increased revenues, and how much, over $9 million, you say, would be from fees dealing with our approval, right?
That is
Yes.
correct. That is correct.
And we think that the remaining 12, I guess, is okay, notwithstanding that we're obviously, partway through the year right now, and that process is ongoing at this moment in terms of adjusting fees.
All right. Mr. Abrahams.
Just one question quickly regarding the longevity. There's been a lot of discussion about the longevity back and forth, and I'm not asking you to opine on the litigation that's going on. I just wanted to actually focus on the actual budget for the longevity. there is money that's been appropriated in the budget for longevity for 2018?
No,
There has not been. So the
Correct.
previous administration has not budgeted that money?
correct.
Okay. I guess you don't want to get into the amounts because all that's going to be in the future, but I'm just, okay. All right. Thank you.
I mean,
Okay, before we get to county attorney, I have just a couple of quick questions with respect to how we're managing overtime. Do we know the end of year overtime expenses for 2017, I guess with respect for the police department and the correction center?
I don't have them at my disposal for this meeting.
Okay,
yet. I
but
know that I
could
can
you-
get them for
could you
you,
get them
yes.
for us?
We will be coming to you in May with the year-end board transfer, which will cover all this, which is that very long, extensive one that we do with the controller's office. So that'll have the numbers, the final numbers on there, so.
Okay. If we have the final numbers compared to what the budget
Yes,
projections were,
yeah.
that's fine. And yearly, the police department charges some of its overtime to the grant fund. If you could give us those numbers.
Definitely. I met with them this morning. They're going to do them on a more quarterly basis, is what we're hoping for, so that we can do the chargebacks to certain grants, asset forfeiture, et cetera. That'll be included in that, too. So.
Great, okay.
Okay.
Thank you. And Mr. Nicolello?
Just wanted to follow up on one other area. With respect to your budget modification, my understanding is NIFER found substantial compliance, that it was in substantial compliance with whatever their dictates in terms of what the administration was required to submit. Is that your understanding
Yeah,
as well?
I think so.
Do you know, did they explain what substantial compliance means? No. So,
I'm sorry.
I'm a lawyer. That sounds like something we would come up with, actually. Now, so they've determined there was substantial compliance, notwithstanding the fact that part of the revenues were from the sale of property, correct?
Yes. And I think that, I think, I may find myself slapped down, but I think they're okay with the volume of sale of property that we're talking about. We have tried, not to be identifying property that's, substantial, and then there'd be controversy about what the county should otherwise be using the property for. It's more a question of, I spoke about the ground leases, but otherwise, obviously the county workforce is substantially less than it's been in the past. There are a number of buildings that are not fully occupied, and they tend not to be in decent shape, or that may actually be empty. They cost us a lot of money in terms of protecting them, heating them, repairs that we don't manage to do. So it's not just that you get a one-shot proceeds of sale. It's that you ought to actually get an ongoing savings in more efficiently housing your workforce and fully occupying the buildings that you keep, so that those are the only ones that you have to maintain.
Did they indicate that the sale of property was at risk? Did they identify it as a
They risk a lot of things, just so you know, but I don't have a specific risk from them as far as the sale of property. I mean, we every year we put a number in the budget. Every year they risk it because it's an ongoing, but we do have property sales that make sense sometimes, like slivers of property and everything else that would, make sense that we do currently negotiate and get rid of. So they didn't specifically give me the risk, but sometimes they risk a lot of different revenue streams and expenses too.
That's the point that I was getting at, which is that last year, if we attempted to, put into the budget the sales of property, they would risk it. And they also, in terms of fees, they found substantial compliance, notwithstanding that these proposed fee increases were not even submitted to the legislature yet.
I hesitate to bring this up, but I think we bought ourselves, they noted to our credit that we managed to pay for Restivo, which I think actually bought a degree. I guess this is speculation on my part. I think it bought some tolerance for other pieces of this budget plan, for whatever that's worth.
We call that goodwill.
They seem,
Yeah.
they seem to have more tolerance than they've had in the past, whereas they would not even credit proposed fee increases until such time as the legislature actually approved them. So they're now finding substantial compliance with proposed fee increases, while in the past they wouldn't credit fee increases unless they were fully approved. So I think you're dealing with a kinder, gentler knifer than we did.
It's a honeymoon
I
phase,
hope
would
that's
say.
true, but I suspect it has more to do with the fact that things have actually been going well over time, so that the assumptions, I think, are less stressed now than they were when we put March 15th together, in terms of, the sales tax is coming in and other things are going okay.
I think our experience was different because as the structural deficit dropped every year, they actually became stricter and more less flexible for us. So again, it seems like they've changed, which
For whatever reasons.
right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Abrahams? I understood Mr. Abrahams had some questions of the county attorney.
Good. Thank you.
Well, okay. Is there anything, gentlemen, is there anything else that you'd like to say in summing up or anything? It's not necessary. I'm just asking if there's something you'd like to add.
I think we've said what we have to say, and I think that, again, I appreciate the opportunity to at least attempt to answer your questions, and look forward to the same going forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to deviate for a short period of time from the agenda and ask the county attorney's office to come up. Mr. Abrahams had some questions. Okay, Mr. Abrahams.
Thank you, Chairman. I guess my question started out, and just to recap my first one to make sure we're getting the most accurate numbers for the record. I was asking earlier.
If I might, could you just identify yourselves? This way we just have it for the record.
Connell Denyon, County Attorney's Office.
Ann Margaret Barriga, County Attorney's Office.
Thank you.
Thank you. We were talking a little bit in regards to the total amount of the outstanding tax cert liabilities that has been reduced to a judgment or a settlement to date. I think Mr. Page had mentioned it's still over 100, but if we got more exact numbers, that'd be helpful.
The way I would describe it is that in the last year, the tax cert lawyers, the commercial tax cert lawyers, have started to bring in money judgment actions or enforcement actions to enforce the terms of judgments or settlements that are reached through the Assessment Review Commission or the County Attorney's Office. And the reason that's necessary is that these reductions are usually just to reduce your assessed value, and typically that's handled administratively, how much money that costs. They, in their view, they feel as if they haven't been paid quickly enough, so they've brought these money judgment actions to have a court convert the assessed value reductions into the dollars. So in the last year, they brought a number of these actions. We were, in 2017, we paid out a number of those, so they became moot. But they did file a number of them late in 2017 and I think into 2018. And we've put an estimated liability number on that if they were to be successful. And that number is right now is about 134.5 million if they were successful in their money judgment actions. Now, we're still litigating those, and Ann Margaret can speak to where we are on appeal or not on appeal and how many sets of cases have been filed, but that's the gross number, 134.5 million, if they were successful in their money judgment actions.
So You hit on something, Connell, that you mentioned. You said that the tax cert bar is I guess, seeking or more aggressively going after this accelerated payments more than they have in the past.
That's correct.
Okay. So it sounds like they're also taking some legal steps
That's right.
to enforce the judgments?
It's unusual for them to file money judgment actions compared to what they did in the past. I think they sort of in the past were patient to see sort of to make sure that, that whatever the county's plan for paying tax certs was being followed through, and whether it was borrowing or whatever, they generally would, kind of, wait and see what money was available to pay. Last year, when there was the switch from a planned borrowing of the $60 million to using fund balance of $60 million by the prior administration for 2017, that and a number of other factors resulted in payments being delayed in 2017. And in their view, they felt that there was a gap in sort of payments, and then a number of the firms started bringing these actions. So they have stepped up their enforcement to say, county, if you've got a settlement, you've got a judgment, you have to pay it, we're not going to wait.
And this, I mean, I guess this would be more of a question for finance, but this accelerated process, actually, what's the impact and strains that it puts on the budget?
Well, if they were successful, that,
assuming they're successful.
Well, $134 million, get $134.5 million, that would get defer to Mark or Andrew on that. But, yeah, certainly would put a strain on the county's ability to pay under the current budget.
Mark, can you just answer the question in regards to, has this potential accelerated process, assuming it's successful, has been factored into your budgets? Frank, you need him to come. He said no, but you need him to come to the microphone, right? That's what I thought.
No.
Oh, you didn't. Oh, you could. He could. Oh. You could have went to where Connell and you could. Yeah, guys, it's fine.
Sorry. Is this okay now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, that's the 350. I was, give or take, I'm talking about. That, I mean, if we get hit by this, or a substantial chunk of it, we don't have this covered right now, and that's I don't know, water, debt restructuring, deficit bonds, something, unless I don't know what positive could break that would give us an incremental resource of that size. I think we have a major problem to come up with this scale of payment for the retroactive claims out of current resources. I'm not a big proponent of borrowing to pay now and then having to pay the borrowing, but under certain circumstances, I don't think you have a whole lot of choice, and I'm not sure we have a whole lot of choice here.
So I just want to make sure I get this and put in perspective. 134.5, assuming they are successful, could be anticipated expense for tax certiorari liability in 2018?
Let me address that. That probably is not a 2018, because I think it depends. I mean, it could be, but the way litigation works, and Margaret can talk about, we're going to be filing notices of appeal or have filed notices of appeal. We will be continuing to defend ourselves as hard as we can against these actions. We have a number of defenses that we're asserting, but that number, whether it's 2018 or 2019, is out there, and it is part of sort of, as Mark said, it's part of the 350 anyway. It's going to come due, if not now, it'll come due at one point, probably in 2019.
And Connell, this 134, as we see it, is as it moves through the different processes, it's judgments, though.
Well, it's one of the issues in the litigation, whether these are settlements or they're enforceable judgments, whether the ARC settlements are enforceable as ARC determinations, which have the force of a final judgment. Those are things we are litigating.
Okay. Even when you get to a judgment, when you listen on the side to this process, it takes time before the county is actually faced with the obligation right then to pay the money. There's this process that just eats months. It's a little unclear how many months, but maybe it takes you into the first half of 19 instead of 18. It's sort of unclear.
Okay. But I guess based on what I'm hearing today, also the acceleration of the process is allowing these actual judgments when they get to that point to come faster than has been anticipated in the past. Is that a safe assessment that I'm making?
I think that's right. I think they're being much more proactive in trying to get paid on what we've, sort of had a much more managed process. I think they're forcing the issue much more. And maybe Mark could talk about, like the number of cases they're bringing, putting on what's called the trial calendar. If they're not satisfied that a settlement is forthcoming, that they're really forcing the trial on a tax cert case. And I think that's been an increase as well.
Yes, in February, the tax cert bar put 250 cases on the appraisal exchange calendar. And what that essentially means is that you have to be ready to file your trial appraisals on that day, which are costs to the county as far as experts and preparation of the appraisals, as well as...
How is that different from years past?
Well, 250 cases from one calendar that were put over to an appraisal exchange date, I don't think has ever happened before. You might generally have a handful of cases put on the appraisal exchange calendar in a given year, in a given month. But 250 from one calendar is exorbitant amount.
I see. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish.
And for instance, this morning in court, there were about 50 cases put over to the appraisal exchange calendar, much less than the 250 from February's calendar, but certainly much more than there has been in the past. So once they accelerate their case to that final status of an appraisal exchange, it essentially means parties have to either come in, negotiate, settle on the appraisals, or go forward to trial if there are real issues in the appraisals. And that accelerates their payment because then there's a signed order that much quicker, as opposed to going through the steps and the processes that could potentially take 6 months to 8 months for signing of a judgment. A judge would sign it almost immediately.
So it sounds like, obviously, I mean, as you elaborate a little bit more on the trend and whether or not the county has the resources, it sounds, based on Mr. Page's testimony, we do not. I'm just curious to hear when the administration could be able to report back, when you have more concrete numbers as we go through the year. When will they be able to report back, Mr. Page, in regards to how they will meet these challenges based off of the trend we are enduring now and could conceivably be going through for the next few months? Sorry to keep bringing you back and forth. You should grab that chair in the front.
Or I'll try this one this time. Is that okay? The county is obligated to update its financial plan by the end of June, and that picks up 19, at least on a preliminary basis, and actually, I guess, the 3 years after that. I would hope we had something more definitive to say about what a sort of reasonably serviceable financial plan would look like for that update. We will certainly be spending time, as we did coming up to March, trying to figure out whether there's any way of more efficiently providing services and stretching whatever resources we've got to see to what degree we might be able to cover some part of this number. I don't know. I mean, the other thing that I've not mentioned up to now is, as you know, we have all of these open collective bargaining contracts.
Yes.
Which is another piece of this picture.
And there's no budget. There's no money appropriated.
Not at this moment, no.
Is that a better question? Connell, is being that obviously these judgments are very well being accelerated, and I remember in years past there's been discussion regarding concern whether or not the county's assets could be held and be used to force payment to be able to get this done. Is that a potential negative outcome that could happen?
I mean, I think it's premature to talk about it, but, you know, I think if they did have enforceable money judgments and we'd run out our appeals, I mean, they would certainly probably look to try to enforce in the normal way that a private party would enforce against another private party, attaching bank accounts. They can't attach against county property. You know, we would raise defenses to their ability to try to attach against our bank accounts, but that's certainly something that would likely be litigated.
Okay. Anything? That's it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Next up is the County Comptroller's Office. If you'd like, you can sit at the table. If you'd like to stand, that's fine too.
Good. Great. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be before you today. I am here to discuss.
Yep.
Oh, Shari James, Chief Deputy Comptroller. Today I'm here to discuss the fiscal year 2017 preliminary unaudited GAAP results. The numbers presented are as of April 15th and do not include various management and external auditor adjustments that will impact these numbers at the end. In addition, it is important to note that pencils are not completely down at this point. There are still outstanding items that are being processed related to fiscal year 17. Final audited results are expected to be released by mid-2018, and our office looks forward to speaking with you then. Okay. And as provided on the fact sheet that was distributed, the preliminary unaudited GAAP results for the 5 primary operating funds indicate a $48.9 million deficit for fiscal year 17. This is primarily attributed to lower than expected revenues, even given the sales tax increase of $8.9 million. As you see here, the key primary drivers were the county did not borrow as budgeted to fund the tax cert liabilities, which resulted in a $60 million reduction in other financing sources. As discussed, the Federal Transit Authority monies and the OTB revenues were not received as well in fiscal year 17. And when we look at the financial condition, preliminary operating results show a negative unassigned fund balance at fiscal year end 17. The tax cert liabilities have increased to about $560 million at fiscal year 17, and the deferred pension liability, which is the amount that's owed to the New York State retirement system, is about $235 million. Okay. And that's pretty much the preliminary results that we have as of April 15th.
Mr. Coppell, I understand you have some questions.
Good afternoon, Ms. James. That was a terrific speech. Fast, concise. Just a couple of questions, please.
Sure.
Well, first of all, that 560 cert liability,
Yes.
Does that include LIPA?
It does.
Okay, so that explains the differential between the administration figures and yours. Okay. Do you expect that the trends, you started out saying that that it's lower than expected revenues. Do you expect that as a trend that will continue?
We haven't. We'll be able to look at the budget at the 6-month mark, and we'll be able to provide our opinion on that.
Assess as to how they're, okay, fine.
Yes.
And the OTB and those things, they're not received in 17, but what do you see going forward?
As per the administration, it will be received in fiscal year 18. We haven't received it due to what's called the available, the period of availability for this year.
And the same with departmental revenues? What do you foresee as the trend?
That will be, we'll give our opinion on it at the 6-month mark as well.
Right. You were here before, right?
I was, yes.
Okay. So both the Comptroller's Office and the administration, going back a couple months, made a very forceful presentation in case as to why we absolutely must authorize borrowing in respect of the Restivo judgment. You'll probably recall that.
We didn't make a case for borrowing. We just made a case for the
correct.
For
Forgive
the
me. You're quite right. You're quite right. Now, the administration offered an explanation, and forgive me, but I just, at this point, I'm hopeful that we're going to get some more clarity. I just did not understand it. Of the use of the ability to not borrow, there's an unassigned fund balance, which is negative. That's what you've told us, right?
The preliminary results show that it's going to be negative.
And that's what you said back then. And that was the reason, if I recall, that we could not borrow.
No, at that point.
We couldn't, I'm sorry, use the fund balance or any.
Well, at that point, we had fiscal year end 16 numbers, and the unassigned was not negative. The unassigned fund balance at that point.
But what we were told when we had that debate, that there was, as of that time, we were not able to use any fund balance because you anticipated that it was negative at that point, and certainly not considerably positive as it might have been at the end of 16.
Yeah, at the end of 16, it was, let me just get the numbers here, 46.8.
Correct, but we were told that that was no longer available at the time of the debate. We were told that that money was no longer available.
Well, they didn't
on an unassigned basis.
Right, the administration didn't borrow for the tax cert liability, so it has to be funded from a place.
That was not my question. We were told that place, if or the fund balance, was no longer available to be used for that purpose.
Going back to what was presented, that's not the way it was presented. It was presented as we have the numbers at fiscal year end 16. Those were the most recent audited numbers that we had available. It showed a fund balance of unassigned fund balance of $46.8 million, and the Restivo judgment, I believe, was a little less than that.
Was a little bit less than that, but we were okay. So then, in your view, was there at that point a proper representation of the need to borrow?
I don't have an opinion on that. We presented where we were at the end of fiscal year 16.
Okay, so, but I think that the explanation that we heard a little bit earlier was that there was different ways of looking at it. And again, forgive me if I don't mean to mischaracterize anything.
Okay.
But that there were different ways of looking at it. And one way of looking at it said that we did not have to borrow now. But we would have, nonetheless, we would have to fill up that hole somewhat later, either way, because the differentiation, again, between cash and accrued balances. Am I misstating that?
I'm unclear about what you're asking.
I don't blame you. I'm unclear, too. Why I'm unclear is the difference is there a way of looking at this fund balance as we look at it today that would allow us to go ahead and use it to fund various obligations since there's a negative unassigned balance? Can we use the cash in that at this point?
I think you're referring to two different things.
Probably. Yeah.
Yes. So the unassigned fund balance, if it goes negative, then you can't appropriate that or use that to fund operations.
Right. And nonetheless, are we now using it to fund operations nonetheless on the theory that we'll fill the hole later?
Again, the way the results are shown right now, there's negative unassigned fund balance, so you wouldn't be able to use that to fund operations.
So the answer is yes to my question then. If we're using it, we're not supposed to be using it, and we're using it nonetheless?
It's negative, so you can't use a negative
So I'll
number.
take that as a yes. Okay. And again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so if I'm saying something wrong, let me know. I think I certainly would appreciate a robust explanation of how things are being done in terms of use of monies. Where did that money come from to pay the Restivo judgment and so forth? Is it simply a cash flow issue and it was taken from operating funds and things are kind of moved around? Or I'm having some difficulty understanding what exactly happened there and why the need that was originally perceived to go ahead and borrow is no longer necessarily a need.
Yeah, I would leave that to the administration to be able to discuss that with you.
All right, so hopefully they'll provide that, and that's a fair enough answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Nicolallo.
Okay, just a few questions. Just to get back to the whole issue of the projected deficit. So last year you had an expense related to tax cert liability that it was anticipated or budgeted that would be filled, at least in part, by borrowings.
Correct.
And when those borrowings didn't happen, they were substituted, at least in part, by expenditures out of fund balance.
Correct.
But as a result of that, and apparently there may have to be additional expenditures out of fund balance to fill that deficit, to fill the gap completely. Is that true, or has it already been paid?
These tax cert liabilities have been paid.
They've been paid, okay.
Yes.
All right, so the difference is, and the reason there's this gap, is that instead of using as budgeted, the borrowed monies, they used fund balance.
Yes, the borrowed monies didn't come through as budgeted, so the fund balance would be the draw.
Okay. All right. So I just wanted to make clear that that is the primary reason that there is this large gap, this large deficit at this point.
At this point, that is what we are seeing.
It's not as if the administration went out and, putting aside tax liability, just overspent its budget by $50 million on various items. It simply had this expense, was not allowed to use borrowing, and wound up using fund balance.
Again, there were other factors that were included in, the deficit number, but this was the primary driver, and wanted to give very high-level overview at this point in time, as the numbers are not final. But once they are final, we are going to discuss those with you and the different moving factors that are included.
Okay, I don't know if you can answer this question, but assuming that as it was the case, that they weren't permitted to do the borrowing, could you identify anybody else in the budget that they could possibly have located tens of millions of dollars to pay the tax certs?
At this point in time, I don't have the answer to that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi. One of the key primary drivers that you outlined was departmental revenues. They were lower. Yes. So I know you said you're going to have a more thorough report after the 6-month mark, but was it one department or a combination of many departments that resulted in that $6.6 million lower than budgeted?
It was a combination as of today, a combination of many different departments.
Okay, so you'll have a report soon?
Yes, at the final, when the numbers are final, we will issue a report, and we'll have all that information available.
Okay, and the off-track betting money, I know that we said we didn't get in 2017. Do you have a reason why the county was unable to collect it last year?
I don't know. The Comptroller's Office doesn't collect that revenue, so
know?
Yeah, no.
Okay, no,
I don't.
I just wondered, we keep saying it'll be put in 2018. How do we know for sure we're getting it this year? You don't know?
That I don't. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Abrams.
Thank you, Chairman. I just have a quick question. During the end of Mr. Page's testimony, he had indicated that there's no funding in the budget for the future CBAs. as well as the longevity pay. And obviously, Mr. Denyon also indicated in regards to the accelerated tax cert liability and what's going on with some of the tax cert bar. That's also the case. I wanted to ask you whether or not you concurred with their assessments in regards to those unfunded liabilities or concerns, and then also ask you in regards to the pension costs, has that been properly funded as well?
So in regards to the budget, we'll have a full review at the 6-month mark, but is my understanding at this point the budget that was adopted did not include what you just stated.
None of the 4 things have been?
The pension liability is budgeted for.
It is budgeted
Yes.
for? Okay. But the tax cert liability, as per Mr. Denyon's testimony, as well as the collective bargaining agreement longevity, is not budgeted for?
Those additions I did not see in the budget.
Okay. Has the Comptroller's Office, I guess when you come up with that 6-month report, you're going to actually put estimates of what you believe these things will cost? Or?
Correct. Correct. We're going to give a full assessment of our opinion on where we are at the 6-month mark and where it's projected to go for the rest of the year.
But how would you do that for the CBAs?
We would have to look at that.
Okay.
I don't have a...
Okay. And the longevity pay, have you examined what the longevity would have cost
Not
under
at
the previous
this-
amendment?
not at
Under the
this
previous
moment,
amendment?
no.
Okay. Nothing further, Chairman.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this point, I'm going to ask Mr. Chalmers to come up, please.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Do you want to identify yourself?
Maurice Chalmers, budget review.
Mr. Chalmers, I just have basically one question. You've been sitting here throughout the entire hearing, and my question for you is there anything you'd like to add or say or tell us as an explanation or give us any information concerning what you heard here today?
We basically concur with the 2017 numbers. 2017 estimate, as far as we looked at them in the financial system, is approximately $50.1 million deficit as of right now. I think the Comptroller's Office and the administration gave different explanation on the aspects or the key drivers of some of the indices, and we are basically in agreement with some of it. The 2018 numbers, we are in the process of doing some projection for 2018. We don't have a solid number for 2018 as of yet. One of the areas that we will have to really consider is tax rates. So we probably will need to go back on 2018, have conversations with the county attorney, put a number on the exposure, and add that to our risk.
Do we have any specific questions?
Just,
Wait,
I'm sorry, I don't know if I jumped ahead, Alan.
all right, Ms. Birnbaum.
Thank you. I read your report, it was very thorough, and you mentioned funding for the inmate health care, which has not been restored in the budget. Could you elaborate on this and say about how much that was?
That funding was not restored as part of the administration changes. We have some concerns because we will incur the cost, but there's no funding in the amendments to cover the extra expense.
Could you say how much that expense is?
I believe, I could go back and double check, but I believe it was around 1.4 million. But we will, 1.4 million.
Oh.
Page is still here.
Oh, Page. Mark, excuse me, Mr. Page.
Sorry, I'm saying it.
Mr. Page. Would you be able to add anything to that? Because it does concern me. Could be problematic, no?
We discussed the cost of health care with the corrections staff, when we were putting March together, they thought that they had some potential to put somebody in charge of watching that cost and how care was provided, that I think could give us an expense outcome that's better than what was just mentioned. I think that, we're aware that we have a risk there. I think we have means of covering it if we need to, as a matter of fact. And, we'll see how it goes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Abrams?
Maurice, I know you had heard earlier in regards to some of the things that are in the budget that the county could very well be obligated to pay in 2018. We talked about longevity, the collective bargaining agreement, the tax certs, the pension costs. I know you had said you're still diving into the numbers, but I just wanted to ask you, as pertains to the tax cert liability, do you think how much of a risk would you assess to the tax cert liability, hearing what Mr. Denyon had indicated as well? To me, that seems like the largest, biggest number that gives me a little concern.
There's approximately $30 million in tax cert funding in the budget.
Seems inadequate. I'm sorry to cut you off.
So our original assessment was another $45 million worth of risk, which would bring it to historical spendings. But as was just mentioned by Mr. Denyon, that exposure could go up to $134 million. So we would need to go back to him and see how much of the tax certs could become judgment and therefore due, and that would be the risk that we would recognize in the 2018 budget.
My concern also is we should probably monitor this more closely than we have in the past, considering what Mr. Denyon had indicated in regards to the accelerated pace. I just don't want to be I don't want the county to be handed a bill towards the fourth quarter of this year and us not know about it and have an opportunity to prepare for it.
Agreed. I believe NYFA in their original assessment had a risk of $40 million. We thought it was a little bit more in our original assessment. We had 45, but again, we will reach out to the county attorney and try to get a number as far as how much risk we could have in addition to the $30 million that is currently funded in the 2018 budget.
Gotcha. I have nothing further, Chairman.
Mr. Coppell.
Good afternoon, Maurice.
Good afternoon.
To see you. So I just want to keep on beating a particular horse there. Can you offer any enlightenment on my question that you've heard me refer to a number of times on the use of the fund balance? Was it used? Were money taken from a fund which had cash but an unassigned negative balance and so forth?
There was a balance in the undesignated fund balance of $177 million.
Cash?
We had enough cash to back that up. So we had $177 million in the undesignated fund balance.
As of?
As of the end of 2016.
16, right.
Correct. So what the controller was talking about was the unrestricted portion of it, which was the $46.7 million, I believe, was their number. And I guess what was presented to this body was the need to bond for Estivo in order not to spend the entire unrestricted amount.
And was that indeed spent and then some?
I don't know. I am not 100% sure of the answer. I believe the Estivo case was settled. I am not 100% sure of where the funds came from.
They probably came from just cash?
It probably just came from cash, but I don't know for sure.
I would have to double check that.
Could you?
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Mr. Nicolello.
Just several quick questions. The administration made a determination actually not to pay for Restivo through the bonding and fund balance, but has identified revenues, et cetera, which largely are going to pay for the Restivo judgment. Now, since they've identified these revenues and other initiatives, and now have connected those to Restivo, and in fact, if they are spent for Restivo, if the administration needs additional monies later on this year in terms of settling contracts, those monies are gone, correct?
Correct.
Right.
By paying for Restivo out of, and not accounting for any borrowing, you've essentially removed any flexibility that you could have had in the budget.
Thank you.
If there are no further questions, I think our job here is done. Thank you, Mr. Chalmers.